Human beings are really fun to watch. Sometimes, though, I'm a bit embarrassed to be one. Today, I want to look at the phenomenon of like us and not like us. How deep does it go? Newborns immediately start the process of populating their pattern matching machinery. Watch a baby who is a few months old and living with clean shaven people when presented with their first bearded stranger. To the baby, the bearded face is unmatched and fits into the not like me cubbyhole. People who are in the not like me cubby are a threat according to the bits of the brain trying to make sense of the world. And the oldest parts of our ancestral brain are primarily concerned with being safe in a terrifying world. Watch the child through the first year and notice the increased interest in pattern matching. The child is generating some basic stereotypes in order to systematically categorize the environment. As an example, adults tend to label their toddlers as shy when they hide behind mommy's legs when a stranger enters their environment. I would suggest that that is a false attribution error. It isn't shyness, it is wariness. The child is trying to decide if the new person, or big dog, is a threat to their safety. This is not conscious decision making, at least not for very young kids. This gives us some near universal childhood concerns, like being afraid of the dark. Of course, it isn't the dark, per se. It is fear of what can't be seen that might pose a threat. It is the result of an underdeveloped map of the environment. We also start developing intuitions. These are statistics about the interpreted accuracy of our matching patterns. Children begin to rely on cues from adults to categorize their environment. However, they will test. That is, they don't simply take mom's or dad's word for it. The child will rely on their parents to save them if a test fails. At some point, a child shifts from like me to like us. Like us might consist of self, parents, siblings, pets, and other living entities that are generally in the toddler's world. That is the group of creatures considered family. Not like us includes the rest of the world. Like me hasn't gone away, though, and it will likely come back loudly in adolescence. In emergencies, it is likely to come back any time during a person's life. As the child ages, the like us category widens to include people we live near or socialize with. It continues to widen and differentiates into levels of like us from close to distant. Our close like us category is generally limited to fewer than 200 individuals. This is the group in which we place the greatest level of trust, warranted or not. Our distant ancestors seldom reach that limit. A troop of apes wouldn't get that big. There are levels of like us that contain people we generally consider safe, but that we don't interact with very much. An example of this might be in school. The child's classroom is a close level of like us, but the other classrooms would be more distant. This is a big reason school bullying is really bad. It muddies the water at the edges of like us and interferes with development of good risk assessment skills. Beginning in early adolescence, we gain brain size primarily in the prefrontal cortex. This is the seat of rationality and is usually the last part to mature. Our ability to assess danger and risk is here. It develops slowly and might take 15 years. It is the traffic cop at the busy intersection of emotional reactions. Unfortunately, developing this functioning can be inhibited. Every adult knows someone who still acts like a reckless idiot into their 50s. As the brain develops during this phase, we shed some of childhood's stereotypes, the ones that are faulty and simply do not serve anymore. We modify and strengthen others, and we create new ones. This is why we lose memories of our early childhood. The lost ones simply don't comport to reality as we now know it. Our desire to belong is very important to us in early adolescence. We have a strong urge to increase our close circle. This too is a survival trait. Here we create our safety in numbers community. By the end of adolescence, we have mostly completed our development of like us. After this stage, it is increasingly difficult for us to include new groups into our like us patterns, though we are clearly not done with not like us. As we grow into adults, we subdivide not like us into categories that range from reasonably safe to very dangerous. It appears that our upper limit for like us has grown somewhat because we have learned to work together in larger groupings to meet survival and social needs. This blossomed into creating large societies and large towns, eventually huge cities with millions of people. So we can live in close proximity with large numbers of people, but we still spend most of our time with small groups while ignoring larger collections of people. We simply don't want to deal with an intimate group over 200 people. So what does the newer part of the brain do with the vast amount of data that is pouring in? Well, it is still pattern matching. This time we're using very complicated patterns based on our current beliefs and values. And that is driven by bias. The less primitive brain is busy deciding if small groups and individuals from the large not us group poses a threat to our way of life. This level of analysis is about our emotional comforts. It does feel the same to us, and our conclusions still feel to be about safe and unsafe. But that is a wild oversimplification. Have you had conversations about privilege, perhaps at school or work? We talk a lot about male privilege, white privilege, wealth privilege, and so forth. For each adjective, the members of that group who are in the conversations generally react with some level of hostility. Why? Bias. It is difficult to see our own privilege, and everyone has some kind of privilege, because we tend to see the world through our unquestioned biases. The biological need to pattern match gets in the way of rational threat assessment. Also, many kinds of our privilege can assist in mating success. Once again, this is the ancestral brain in action. This all worked really well 10,000 years ago, and it works much less well in our crowded world today. In the early days of Sapiens, we matched on a limited number of criteria that created a pretty accurate assessment of real danger. We have so much data coming in now that we are matching on details that will likely result in a far less accurate assessment. In both cases, though, the story we have is that our assessment of danger is right. And that certitude prevents us from checking our privilege. It is my guess that a very few human beings are sexist or racist by conscious design. We are acting as we do based on our store of untransformed matching patterns and doing threat assessment based on a low probability intuition incorrectly promoted to high probability. Another thing that humans will do is allow exceptions to intuitions. So an individual who belongs to a threat group by our internal definitions may be reclassified as safe even while the rest of the group remains off limits. Small numbers of exceptions will not cause us to flip the threat assessment on their group. It does not occur to our ancestral brain to give up the criteria that caused the original assessment. We have no automatic mechanisms to discard matching patterns once we reach maturity. We might, for instance, pattern match on a particular skin color as a threat. That one's pretty obvious, right? But we also match on origin, geography, religion, gender, age, class, and other general categories we created early in life. Most of these patterns are not serving us any longer, except that shared matching patterns can tighten the bonds of what we perceive to be our tightest like-us group. And switching groups is very, very hard emotionally. Leaving a religion, getting a divorce, moving out of town, and many other life changes can cause a great deal of grieving due to the increased activity of the ancestral brain to engage in a new set of worries about survival and belonging. And that part of the brain is not good at noticing complex reality. So, is it a problem for a mature adult? Yes, I think so. If you don't notice and you don't mind that a 14-year-old you is tricking the mature you and scaring the crap out of a 5-year-old you on a daily basis, then it isn't a problem for you, I guess. I certainly don't want my adolescent biases running my life, nor do I want my young patterns making the decisions about how my future plays out. We cannot turn off pattern matching behavior, and we really shouldn't want to. It can save your life. What we want to do, though, is actively and intentionally deal with our matching patterns. Weed out the patterns and criteria that really do not serve and might make life more difficult. There is nothing easy about this. We generally have associated ourselves with people who match us on the patterns we have. So changing any of our patterns might put us at risk of being separated from some of our groups. Rather than dumping a particular pattern, we might double down on it to maintain our group membership and group identity. Belonging is a powerful emotional motivator. This behavior is exactly what I'm pointing at when I'm saying the ancestral brain is busy protecting us from threats it perceives and ignoring anything our forebrain has to say about the nature of or reality of that threat. We have thousands of patterns stored. We bring them to bear with no conscious thought. Most of our pattern matching threat assessment is simply the machinery of our mind operating on automatic. We can live an entire life just like this. It is a life filled with resignation and cynicism. It is a life lived waiting for the other shoe to drop or for the next thing to go wrong. So, what to do if doing something about it is what you want? The simple answer is to stop living on automatic. Well, yeah. So how? What does it take to live consciously? It takes recreating your personal philosophy from the ground up. It takes applying the fundamental question of rationality to everything in your world. Here it is. What do I know, and how do I know it? If you take this path and recreate yourself, you're going to have some cherished beliefs challenged. Every unquestioned aspect of your identity will get in your way on this path. As soon as you hear yourself think, it's just common sense, take a deep breath and reevaluate. Nothing is true simply because it is commonly believed. Also, no answer is true simply because it seems to be the only option. How broadly does this play in families, communities, and countries? We live in communities that have established networks of conversations. The networks are our primary source of what we think is right or wrong, what concepts are true and which are false. The problem is the networks are not reliable for comporting to reality. Look around. Look at communities you don't belong to. It will become obvious to you what truths are rattling around any given network. Very large groups have networks of conversations that include the concepts of nationalism, patriotism, religion, and other large issues. So what to do? As easy as it is to see the networks of other groups, we are seeing them through the networks of our group. Consequently, our reactions are not to be trusted. The only real doorway is to look at everything in the world with a skeptic's eye. Not just being skeptical about what we perceive, but about how we feel about what we perceive. It is the fundamental question. What do I know and how do I know it? And statements that begin with something like, everyone knows, is likely to be untrue to some degree or based on woefully incomplete data. Give up the notion that what you are being told is true because everyone you know is telling you. This is not easy. But I think it is necessary if you want a life of your own that you can be proud of when it comes to an end.